Thank you all again for being here. I wanted to start our program, and I know I'm interrupting your lunch conversations, but Tom did a nice job of quietening his table, so everybody else, if we can come together. I want to first acknowledge some important people that are at lunch with us today. I have a list. It's got a lot of names. And I want to begin first with the members of the board for TAG. And if they don't mind, I would love for them to stand up so we can acknowledge all the hard work that we do. As many of you know, Andrea had left us and we are in search for an executive director. We're close to having one, but in the meantime, our board with the Vice Chair Jim Russ, Michael Peterson is our treasurer, Carol Lewis, I think Carol's not here, Jeff Collins is here, Raj, I saw Raj here somewhere, Raj's right there, who's our membership chair, Veronica, Delia, you here? I didn't see Delia here. Greg Reyes, who has helped us in many times, and also in working with State Representative, bringing the speaker here. We're grateful for Greg's leadership, not just on TAG, but so many other civic endeavors. And I also tell him he's the best dressed guy I always run into a room. And Darren Willa, Darren's not the best guy, but he's a really smart guy. Hey, you have friends here. You have friends here. You know, and Jack Drake, who is one of our founding members, please join me in giving them a warm round of applause for everything they do. I want to acknowledge Mike Garver for his support for this event. Mike leads our region in many things, but as part of his support for this program and many others, he has a passion for making sure that our waterways are clean and does a lot, both in working on the bayous, but also really trying to make sure that we're putting policies in place that solve the systemic problems that cause litter. And so, Mike, thank you so much for your support and for your sponsorship. The Texas Street Coalition's here. Texas Street Coalition does a lot of advocacy in and around transportation, and without people who care enough to show up and do the hard work, the system wouldn't work. So we thank you for your leadership and thank you for your support for this program. I want to also acknowledge some of the great state representatives we have here. Alma Allen, Representative Allen was here or is about to be here. Jolanda Jones, I know that she's on her way. Ron Reynolds was here. I saw Ron. Don't know if maybe he might have headed out, but Representative Reynolds. I saw Representative Sean Theory here. Thank you for your leadership. I see Dennis Paul on my list here. I don't think I saw him, but right there. Welcome. I think we should give him an applause right there because I forgot. Dennis's spouse often joins us. We give her a hard time. We say that you want the road built, and you want the road built now. Thank you, Dennis, for being here. The Mayor of Pearland, Kevin Cole, is here. Kevin, thank you so much for being here, being part of this. And then the Honorable Mano de Alice is here. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being here. Thank you for helping us bring the speaker here. We appreciate everything that you do for our region. And then there's some department directors that are very important to us. Tina Peterson's here, representing the flood control. Roberto Trevino, Harris County Toll Authority. Tom Lambert, the CEO of Metro. And then Sanjay Ram, my friend, our friend, who always has been supportive of TAG and deeply appreciates your leadership. Sanjay, Christina, and the speaker are part of the Texas Lyceum. And so we got to take our picture today, and it'll be on the Lyceum website in a minute. You know why? Because we have the speaker on the picture with us. Generally, I send my picture or Sanjay's picture, they never put it up. But now that picture will be everywhere. And then our Commissioner, Tom Ramsey, is with us. Thank you, Tom, for being here. Our Metro board member, Lex, is here. Lex, thank you for being here as well. My apologies for not doing the proper order and not doing this, but I was working off of a sheet, so forgive me. I hope I've mentioned it. Are there any elected officials that I did not recognize? I'm sorry, I can't see. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for being here. Appreciate you being part of this and making the trek into Houston for us. Really, really appreciate you. So with that, I want to keep my remarks short and introduce the Speaker of the Texas House to come up and say a few words. But I want to acknowledge something that sometimes we don't recognize. In Texas, our form of government has a very unique speakership in that both Democrats and Republicans come together to appoint a speaker. That is not true in the United States Congress, and that is not true in many of the state legislatures across the country. With that, you get the kind of leadership that helps move our state forward. And I've always taken pride in how we elect the Speaker of the Texas Legislature. And in the Speaker we have today from Beaumont, he has led that way. He has brought people together every single time to do the hard work of getting things out of the House. And it's not an easy job. Our legislature meets every 2 years for 6 months, and then sometimes there's a special session. In that time period, we pass a biennial budget, taking competing priorities from across the state, from across the different interests, and it becomes the job of the speakers to kind of keep the peace, not just in the Texas House, but in our state government. And I can't think of anybody better to lead us in this next coming session than Dade Phelan. So please help me welcome the representative from Beaumont, our friend, the leader of the Texas House, Dade Phelan.
Thank y'all. Thank you. Mustafa wasn't joking. Y'all really are kissing up today. That is a fantastic standing ovation. I hadn't even said anything yet, so I hope my remarks are pleasing at least. Thank you, TAG, for having me. I appreciate it. I've never, I guess, been able to address this group before. You were absolutely right. By the way, congratulations on 10 years of advocacy for the Houston, Harris County area. You're very wise to create a group like this. I was saying this earlier that in Austin, you're either at the table or you're on the menu. That's just kind of how it works. And my understanding that TAG was basically founded and created because the Dallas area was doing a better job of advocacy and funding requests at the legislature. So this area, the state decided they needed to compete, and that's great. Because let me just say, I was telling Mono this, thankfully, from being from a rural area in Beaumont, Texas, thank God that Dallas and Houston can never agree on anything. Because it creates an opening for guys like me to go in there and get some crumbs that fall at the bottom of the table there. But thankfully, y'all never get along. That's a good thing for a guy like me. But no, I want to appreciate the House members being here. Sean and Dennis and Ron, and I ran into him earlier. Who else? Of course, Mono. He's going to be a freshman coming in, the rookie. I look forward to. I'm glad I'm sitting next to Mono because I spent a little too much time with my other colleagues this past go around, and I would say y'all are sight for sore eyes, but not really. It's kind of nice to get back home and get back to our family. I know Sean missed her daughter as well, so. But we're going to be back in session in 55 days. Who's counting? My wife is. But it's right around the corner, and let me just say this. There's no better state to live in this country and to work and raise a family in the state of Texas, without a doubt. We are so fortunate to be in the great state of Texas right now. Post-COVID, no state came back faster and more furious than the state of Texas. And that's something that everyone in this room should be proud of. It's nothing that a politician did. It's what industry did. It's what small, medium, and large businesses contributed to. And, about halfway through session, things really started opening up because the vaccine was made available across the state. And just to give you a little idea, because I think the biggest probably subject matter going in the next session will be the budget, and I'll get to those numbers in a second. But I just want to remind you, in 2019, when we left session, we were projected to have an $8 billion surplus, which was very robust, largest surplus I've seen as a member for sure. And then about halfway through COVID, that $8 billion surplus was actually projected to be a $20 billion deficit. And I'm not a genius at math, but that's a lot. That's a big delta to come up with. And so, again, the comptroller, Mr. Hager, was able to project, but based on sales tax revenue halfway through session, that this economy was going to come roaring back, and we were going to be able to fulfill our mission of fully funding education without cutting transportation, for instance, or health care, because that's where all the money is, quite frankly, is in those three subject matters. So we didn't have to cut any of that, and we were able to actually pass a balanced budget. So I'm just giving you an idea of the economy right now. If Mr. Hager hadn't been here in a while, or if he's coming up after me in a couple of months, I'm going to steal all this thunder. But total GR revenue that is being estimated right now, just for this year, this fiscal year, and GR is just the general revenue we can spend just about, use it to allocate and appropriate any way we feel fit. It's about $74.47 billion for FY 2022. That's a 16% increase from last year. It's a lot. That's a big increase. And I'm going to tell you that the year over year from the previous year was even bigger than that. So it goes to show how the last year and a half of the economy has taken off here in Texas. The forecasted surplus, now that's a forecast right now. Actually, he made that BR estimation about 6 weeks ago, was $26.95 billion in excess revenue that the state of Texas has at its disposal going into 2023. That is nearly $27 billion. I would assume, I'm not going to speak for the comptroller, but I would assume by the time he makes his formal BRE in mid-January, or probably about mid-February actually, in front of the Appropriations Committee, I would assume that's over $30 billion. And that is a phenomenal amount of money. Again, it's probably the largest deficit times 3 or maybe 4 that the state's seen, at least in my lifetime, if not in anyone's lifetime. The oil and gas is obviously a huge driver of that. Oil and gas production taxes is up about 33% year over year in October. But I can tell you, you could have put a 1 in front of that last year. That's how much of a growth we had last year over the previous COVID year. Natural gas is up 60%. That sounds great. It was 250% sometime this summer, because that's how greater the summer's production was than last summer. And just to give you an idea, there are approximately 370 active rigs in the state of Texas right now. That represents half of all the active rigs in the United States of America, right here in the state of Texas. So we are driving not just a phenomenal state economy, we're driving a national and global economy. So, the indicators are great. Unemployment rate 4%. We've added 722,000 jobs in the last year, non-farm jobs in the last year. I don't think any state's anywhere near that. Probably not even halfway to 722,000. I know at one point last year we were adding 1 in 4 jobs in the United States were being added here in Texas, and just goes to show we were open for business and ready to get back to business. The CPI is 9.3, which is actually higher than the national average of 8.2. So we are paying a little bit more for goods around here than other areas of the country. I know, for instance, when I was in Midland, Odessa a few weeks ago, a gallon of milk was $8. They were having a difficult time getting supplies up there, and because of all the new oil and gas exploration that was happening, there was just a scarcity, and you were paying, milk should be under $3, and they were paying $8. So there's a lot of pain to these numbers. I want to remind people there's a lot of pain to these numbers. All this surplus from our sales tax revenue are folks in this room and your neighbors paying more for the same exact thing they got last year. I have 4 boys, and if you knew what we spent on bacon, it would make you question our parental skills. I like bacon, all right? Who doesn't like bacon? Well, I know some people don't like. I like bacon. Bacon's twice what it was last year. Trust me, I'm seeing it on my HEB bills. It's the same 16-ounce bacon, but you're paying more for it. And so I know there are a lot of politicians who are going around saying we need to spend half this revenue. I've got elected officials who having to take the oath of office saying we need to spend all the revenue on property tax relief. Let me just remind you, none of this money came from property taxes. It all came from sales tax. And we don't have a property tax in the state of Texas. It's all local. We're not allowed to. It's in our Constitution. We cannot have a property tax. So whatever we do on property tax relief, I just want to remind you, and I'm in real estate. I'm in commercial real estate. My number one item in my budget that I pay is property taxes across the state of Texas. I can't do anything about it. I mean, I've got no, they don't care if I go to a shopping center in East Texas and complain about the tax rate. They don't care. I'm an absentee property owner. They're not going to give me any breaks. So it is a property tax. Listen, I want to see relief, but we need to just look at maybe more than just property tax. Maybe look at sales tax relief. Maybe look at franchise tax relief. But also, whatever we do on property tax relief, I just want to say, we have to do it every single session in perpetuity, or we're raising your taxes. So how it works is we buy down your local school tax. We pay more, you pay less in your school tax. The state's making up the difference. Well, guess what? Next session, I guarantee you in 2025, there will not be $30 billion in surplus. There may be none. That's how it works. That's how Texas does one of these things. That's why we have the rainy day fund, which I'll get to in a minute. It's actually the economic stabilization fund, meaning it's just to stabilize the budget. So when oil and gas plummets, we're not so dependent upon that, and we use that fund to round out the edges of our budget, and we don't take massive cuts in healthcare, transportation, or education. So that's why it's there. We learned our lessons from an up and down economy here in the state of Texas. So if we spent $15 billion in property tax relief, then if we don't do it in 2023, then we raise your property taxes by $15 billion. That's how it works. And so I just want to remind everyone that, this money it's in our coffers because of inflation, because of pain, and there's more to it than that. No one's even considering how much more expensive it's going to be to run government next cycle. I talked to TxDOT, and I know what their LAR is, which is legislative appropriation requests, and it's going to be a lot more than they realize because they're paying more for asphalt and oil and more for their workforce and health care, just like everyone else is. So the state budget is going to increase just to perform the same services that we had. Just keep it flat from last session. The same services next session will cost more. Will it be 20%? Will it be 25%? Will it be 30%? So that $30 billion starts getting dwindled away pretty darn quick, right? But I do want to talk about infrastructure. I do think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to use some of these resources for infrastructure. And, if we want to be competitive and we want to attract new companies, which we do every day, and the job creators and the innovation, we have to invest in our infrastructure. When I first got elected back in 2014, when I was running, I heard someone at the Realtor say 1,000 people move to Texas every day. And I didn't know if that was true or not. I used it for the last 7-8 years because, hey, it sounded good, right? And if you're a politician, statistics, they're basically made up on the spot anyway, right? I mean, no one ever fact checks us half the time. But truthfully, I went and looked at the census of 2020, which is actually, mind you, this was a COVID year. It was in the middle of a global pandemic. And in 2020, about 1,034 people moved here every day. And it goes to show that 1,000 number was probably light. It was probably more like 1,200 to 1,300 when you look at the growth of Texas over the last 10 years. And it's cliche, but I also say it all the time as well. They don't bring concrete with them. They don't bring asphalt with them. They don't bring public education teachers with them. They don't bring high-speed internet with them, drainage projects, fresh water. You see where I'm going. That's something that the state of Texas has to provide, quite frankly, or partner with the private sector to make certain is there. The state's growing too fast. We have 80,000 miles of road to maintain, just to maintain. That's not new roads. That's 80,000 miles of maintenance roads that we have to stay ahead of. As you know, the Biden administration, through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, appropriated $1.2 trillion towards infrastructure across the state of Texas. And that's the largest, probably, single injection of revenue that TxDOT's going to see, ever, as far as a one-time check coming from the federal government. Now, the state's share of that, Texas's share of that, is $35 billion over the next 5 years. It's $7 billion a year. And I don't want to speak for all the House members in here, but I probably do. What the federal government wants to do is use existing formulas to distribute those funds statewide through existing agencies and bureaucracies. I've got a little bit of a problem with that. That's $35 billion in taxpayer money, and I think elected officials should be overseeing it, not someone who's been appointed to an agency. Because I tell you right now, I'm looking at Sean, for instance, if her district feels like they got the short end of the stick on this $35 billion, she's going to have to answer to her voters about that. We have to have some input and some oversight on this $35 billion. It is taxpayer funded, it's taxpayer dollars, and it's going to state agencies, and I think we need to make certain that we have some oversight of it, and we have some direction. And because, I mean, I appoint people all the day to commissions and agencies myself, but that doesn't mean that I think they should have pure authority over $35 billion. So that's something that, cause, you know, I'm in Hurricane Alley just like you guys. I mean, I'm from Beaumont, and I've seen FEMA dollars flow through and not go where they should go. And I think there should have been more oversight then as well. So, again, an unbelievable amount of resources. I mean, there's a common theme here, right? To continue that, Governor Abbott announced the adoption of the TxDOT Unified Transportation Program, or UTP, a record $85 billion over the next 10 years on the UTP. It was a unanimous adoption. That's the most we've ever seen in that program. It's going to serve Texas well. I know that there are projects, not just in the urban areas, the rural areas that have been tabbed for that. I'm very happy to see that. $14 billion of that is for rural areas, which, you know, keeps people like myself happy and my voters happy. And you know, you got to think about, granted, we might not have as many cars, you know, rolling through our streets as, you know, the city of Houston has. But I mean, look, again, go up to Midland, Odessa, and look at their transportation, and look at I mean, it's almost a crisis. The heavy trucks that are going in and out of that community because of the oil and gas play, that's contributing to all these revenues that we're seeing. And I joke, I go, they put all that black stuff in a pipeline, they send it down to Beaumont, we turn it into money. But it's certainly helping my community as well. But their roads, I mean, that's a rural area by definition, and their roads are atrocious. And so we may have to do something beyond this $85 billion to help the Midland Odessa area out as well. They say the $8.5 billion average over the next 10 years in the UTP is expected to generate about $15.5 billion in economic activity every single year. So it's not only is it a good infrastructure investment, it's a good driver of the whole local economy where those projects are being awarded. And in addition to that, that $85 billion is a direct and indirect contributed to about 58,500 employees in the state of Texas. So it's also creating jobs, obviously, here in the state of Texas. I will say that I've been on appropriations twice, both in 2015 and 2017. And let me just say, all this money, when I talk about the surplus, it's a heck of a lot easier to write a budget with a deficit than it is when there's a surplus. When there's a deficit, no one wants to spend more than 2 minutes in that chair testifying in front of appropriations. They don't want to take a haircut. They don't want to make eye contact with you. They are in and out. And if you've ever been part of the budget writing process, you want to call in sick, right? If there's a deficit. But when there's a surplus, they will spend 8 hours telling you how they're the greatest things in sliced bread, and they need every single dime of that, or they will cease to exist, right? So we have that challenge. The other challenge is the thing called the Economic Stabilization Fund, as known as the Rainy Day Fund. And it's not for rainy days, and I got a lot of that post-Harvey. Why aren't we using the Rainy Day Fund? Because it's not for rainy days, as in literally a rainy day. It is for the budget, to keep the budget balanced and as smooth as possible. So when the ESF was originally created in 1985 and approved by voters in 1986, the original authors of that bill, Hugh Shine is one of them. He came back to the House after 20 years. My wife would no longer let me come back to the House after 20 years. If I paid her, there's no way she'd let me go back to the House after taking 2 decades off. But he reminds me that when they first created that back in 1985, they thought a $100 million balance would be a healthy balance. Okay. It's at $13.9 billion right now. And it's getting close to a statutory cap, which means we can't put any more money in it. That money just flows into GR, basically. And when Glenn Hayward goes to New York and he meets with these credit agencies, and there's, of course, there's 3 major credit agencies, but you sit down as a comptroller from whatever state you're from, and you basically sell yourself to try to get the AAA rating so you get the best pricing on your bonds, save taxpayer dollars. And, of course, we've been AAA for many, many years now. But they do have one criticism of Texas. They say, listen, your tax structure is great. Your regulatory environment's probably one of the best in the country. And you're politically stable for the most part. We know what the next 10 years may look like, 5 years may look like. But let me tell you one thing that y'all lack, and you lack in infrastructure. Your infrastructure is old, it's aging, and you're certainly not keeping up with your growth. That is obvious. And I can't disagree with that. These are people much smarter than I, and their analysis is that the ESF should be about $7.5 billion. And so we're sitting on basically $6.5 billion of funds that these analysts think that it should be better spent on infrastructure. And so I don't disagree with that. I think this is probably the session to really to dive into that. But as we talk about the $30 billion surplus, we'll call it, and you talk about the rainy day fund, and you talk about the $35 billion infrastructure funds, and then there's $3 billion in ARPA, which is American Rescue Plan, that we didn't even spend last October in the last special because we ran out of ways to spend it. We couldn't even think of a good way to spend the money anymore. So that $3 billion doesn't have to be appropriated to 2024. You add all that up, it looks like a phenomenal opportunity. But in the House, at least, I can't speak for the Senate, but in the House, we have things called rules, and we tend to follow those rules. And one of those rules we have 5 different spending caps, meaning that we have to come together and agree on not just, the amounts, but how you're going to spend it. And those are 2 different animals, right? So the ESF, for instance, if we want to tap the ESF for a single dime, it's 100 votes. And that's much harder than you might think. Trust me. I do know how to count. I knew to be speaker I needed 76, so I was good on that number. But 100 is harder than you think, because there may be individuals who want to appropriate the money, but how you appropriate it is an entirely different argument. And if you're not appropriating how I want to appropriate it, then I'm not going to vote for it. So there is a possibility that a lot of this revenue, a lot of these resources, once-in-a-generation resources, may not get appropriated if we can't meet those spending caps. And we actually passed the last spending cap, the 5th one, we actually passed last session, which says we cannot pass a budget beyond population growth and inflation. Because we did that, which I think something we should be very proud of here in Texas, because when was the last time Washington, D.C. passed a budget, period? It's been like a decade. They just do continuing resolutions. They just kick the can down the road. And so what Texas did, for the first time since World War II, in 2015 when I was a freshman, we passed a budget below population growth and inflation, just like everyone in this room has to do in their own business and their own private life. Live within your means. Then we did it again in 17. Then we did it again in 19. And then we did it again in 2021. And again, this has not happened since World War II. So we said, you know what, we're going to keep this in perpetuity. We're going to have a conservative budget, and we're going to save money for the future for a COVID-type scenario or a drop in oil and gas prices. So that's another spending cap that's brand new. We haven't even had the opportunity to vote on that as we move forward to the next cycle. Many of those spending caps are going to be dependent upon the comptroller and the numbers he comes up with as far as budget growth and how fast the economy is growing. These are all tied to different spending caps. So I remind everyone that we may have a lot of great ideas, but if we can't agree on those great ideas, that money will not be appropriated. One unique thing about this coming up session is that we're going to have, for the first time in a very long time, an interim, where we had interim committees, and we actually had to get to study and talk about issues in the interim. So post-2019, I was chair of State Affairs, a wonderful committee, mainly dealing with little things like power lines and pipelines and electricity. Oh, also immigration, gay marriage, just little things that no one has an opinion about at all. But, we had a lot of interim charges discussing, for instance, added generation capacity here in the state of Texas because of the growth we were seeing in population and in businesses. Of course, these businesses that are all moving here have a huge electrical footprint, right? And so we were supposed to have all these discussions, and then I had one interim hearing in January, and then COVID hit, and we had to shut everything down. Because in our House rules, we were not allowed to have virtual hearings. We had to all be in person. There was no virtual anything. There was no Zoom. So we had no interim going into a session dealing with the first global pandemic in 102 years. And so we had no discussion on any of these bills prior to that. And it been made for a more contentious session, I can tell you that, because these ideas weren't vetted, and there weren't meaningful discussions in the 18 months that are in between sessions. So this time we will have one. For instance, in the transportation, they have done phenomenal work. Chairman Canales is really actually gone around the state too to hold some of his hearings. And one thing I've asked him to do is really study the impacts of trade and the increase in migration across our Texas-Mexico border, and because that is such a vital portion of our economy here in Texas is international trade. It's the key to both countries, I think, economy, quite frankly, not just Texas, but the entire United States. I think we even had a gubernatorial candidate who suggested shutting down all ports of entry for a year to deal with the immigration issue. I mean, I couldn't have thought of a worse idea in a million years to shut down all of our international trade with Mexico for a year. Just to give you an example, in 2019, that travel, this is the most recent number, that cross-border travel was approximately $73.5 billion in GDP for the state of Texas. And we have people running for office who actually want to shut that down for a year. It's kind of a scary times we're in. That is also approximately responsible for 382,000 jobs in the state of Texas, is that international trade up and down our Texas-Mexico border. So we need to figure out a way to better handle the inspections and what's coming across. I mean, as a father of 4 children, you know, the fentanyl crisis is real. Actually, a gentleman I went to college with, a good friend of mine I went to college with, his nephew died 2 weeks ago in Austin on a fentanyl overdose. And basically bought a sleeping pill. He thought it was a legit sleeping pill, and it wasn't. It was counterfeit, and he was dead the next morning. It's a real issue, and so we need some cooperation with Mexico and other countries on that, but we cannot slow down trade to the point where it becomes a choke point on our economy and job security here in Texas. One other issue I think's pretty interesting is the road use revenue parity. And that's a very fancy way of saying let's just be fair about how we pay our fair share of taxes on the use of our roads. And so I've asked them to study the impact on the increasing sale of electric and alternatively fueled vehicles and their impact on our transportation system. I can tell you, I've asked them to come up with a method to be fair, but everyone has to pay their fair share, right? And as we have more and more electric vehicles on the road, which, by the way, I will remind you, they weigh a heck of a lot more than a gasoline engine. And we all know what weight does to roads. It's one of the top factors in deterioration is the weight of a vehicle. So you have these much heavier vehicles traveling down our highway system, paying nothing into it, right? So your state tax is 20 cents, of which 15 goes to the highway fund, 5 goes to public education. The federal tax is 18 cents, 0.4. And those taxes are constant. It doesn't matter the price of fuel. You're paying that whether gas is $5 or $1, right? So that's what you pay for your fair share if you're driving a gasoline vehicle. If you're buying an electric vehicle, you're paying nothing. And so if you recall Patricia Harless, Harris County State Rep, back when I was a freshman, of course, Mono will make the same mistake, maybe not. I remember going up to the chair lady and saying, I would like to add this amendment to your big transportation bill, where I was going to increase the registration of an electric vehicle to right at $200-something, right around $200. I mean, your car, your gas car is about $70. The electric was about $200, at least in my amendment. And to me, that would reflect what the average person pays in the fuel tax on an average year. I figured that was fair, right? Just kind of a flat $200. And that may be the recommendation coming forward. I've not talked to Chairman Canales, and she delightfully looked me in the eye and said, "Do not touch my bill. I don't want you offering your amendment." I said, "Yes, ma'am." We never had this discussion. But there's other ways of doing it. You could have an electric. They have these charging stations. You could figure out a tax there. I don't know. It's just if we're moving in that direction with more and more vehicles, especially when we start moving into commercial travel and 18-wheelers and the like, and they're going to be electric, then they certainly need to contribute to our highway system. We have limited resources when it comes to that. So that's another issue that the Transportation Committee is working on right now. And again, it's nice to have an interim. All the committee's reports will be out very soon. I mean, sessions in 55 days, they better get them out the door pretty darn quick. But again, it's been about 4+ years since we've had an interim, so maybe some folks forgot how to do those reports. But we should have them out pretty soon. I look forward to working with everyone in this room. Unlike last session, probably one of the more disappointing things about last session was it was so difficult to interact with the public. And, you didn't have your, I have Golden Triangle days, and the next door to me is Chamber County days. And, of course, you have your own advocacy days where you all come storm the Capitol and tell us how you have to have all that $30 billion or you're not going to exist, right? But truthfully, those days are so meaningful just to hear from folks back home and be able to spread your message, because it's one thing to go to Sean or Ron or Dennis and say, they get it. But, there's a whole lot more of us up there that don't hear, or maybe not even travel through Houston, don't understand your transportation needs. So for this group to be able to come to Austin, and I'm assuming y'all will, to meet with all your state elected officials and the Senate, and you don't have to meet with the Senate if you don't want to. I try to stay out of that chamber as much as I can. But truthfully, I really mean it when I say you're either at the table or you're on the menu. And so it's very important to have groups like this and have meetings like this and to advocate in one unified voice for the whole region, because submitting different transportation plans like we were talking about in piecemeal is not going to get you very far. You have to be in one unified voice. This is the 9th largest economy in the world. It's very diverse. It's very complicated. And like Mustafa said, we are there for 140 days every other year, and that is it. You don't get another bite of the apple until 2025 if you're not there next session. So I want to appreciate being in the 4th most populous county in the country, and I think this county really, it doesn't just drive the regional economy, it drives the state, the national, and the global economy. So as someone who's just on the other east side of you, I appreciate everything that the Houston and Harris County area does. With that, I'm done with my very long remarks. You said just a few words, but that's longer than a few words. But I would be happy to answer, if you have time, I can answer a question or two about anything other than maybe what happened last night or the election. I'm done with the election. I've moved on. It's now session time, but I'd be happy to, from anybody other than a member. Yes? Sure. So, again, I look at all those infrastructure dollars as well. I think that's something that should be on the table. I mean, again, there's $35 billion of that. And again, rather than plugging into an existing formulas, it wouldn't be the worst thing to maybe look at other infrastructure needs that maybe not traditional. And one of those would be the protection district. Of course, Representative Paul's worked very hard on this. And for the last 2 sessions, we've ponied up $200 million to stay in the game, let the Corps of Engineers know that we're serious about doing our part. I know there's already a request to do another $200 million. I can just tell you, we're going to have more participation from the federal government because, and like for instance, in Orange County, which I represent all of Orange County, their local match, what they would have to come up with locally in Orange County would be over $1 billion. They have a $40 million annual budget with basically no surplus. So the thought of them coming up with over $1 billion is not even conceivable. So huge project. I'm full in favor of it from someone who's born and raised on the coast, absolutely, and represents the coastline. And this project would go, obviously, straight through my district. The state's going to keep doing what we can, but these are one of these opportunities for everyone in this room and everyone on the whole, I call the 14 Tier 1 counties. Although Orange is not Tier 1, which I find just hilarious that they're not coastal. But everyone who's going to be impacted by storms and these type of projects have to come to the Capitol and advocate, because I can tell right now, like Representative Paul will tell you, you go talk to someone in the Panhandle about using some of this $30 billion on a coastal project, they're almost the verbatim response is, you chose to live there, deal with it. I'm like, okay, when you choose to take that black stuff out of the dirt and you want to turn it into money, someone has to refine that stuff. And those pipelines, they'll end up in my backyard, right? And my constituents are the ones working inside those gates, and they deserve to have protection from storms so they can continue to fuel this whole country, quite frankly. But great question. Thank you for bringing that up. Great infrastructure project. Yes, sir.
We advocate for making all modes of transportation safer, and TAG advocates for all modes of transportation for people in Houston. I wonder in particular, the ADA sidewalk budget of TxDOT is $20 million a year, which is very insufficient. And so do you think the legislature can do more there on making Texas accessible to walk?
Sure, sure. And for someone who, I lack that in my own community. If you look at the rural areas, we had all these grants to put in the ramps, but then there's no sidewalks to connect the ramps. So you drive around Southeast section, you're like, oh, those good-looking ramps. Yeah, they're useless, right? So it'd be nice to connect those, absolutely. And I'm from a community that has those very nice ramps, but no sidewalks. And it's a quality of life issue. And what I find is when cities pony up the cash and when the state participates, you hear about it. It's one of those things that your constituents say, I'd love being able to walk down to this restaurant as opposed to getting in my car and driving 0.1 miles because there's no way to get there and it's not safe. And so I would support it. My community, again, we have fantastic ramps all over Southeast Texas, but no sidewalks. Any other questions? One more, please. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Well, let me just say, for one, when it comes to funding, I mean, there are grant opportunities all over the state of Texas. I mean, there are grant opportunities left and right. I think that, quite frankly, maybe we do a better job of outreach about these grants because, again, going back to my appropriation days, we do things we call sweep funds, and those are funds that are not appropriated from the previous cycle, and we sweep them into the next cycle. Because you can only appropriate for every 2 years. And there are funds, thousands of funds and grant opportunities that we sweep every single cycle because the grant was never, no one applied for them or they didn't qualify for them, right? But it has to be a competitive process. You have to go out there and apply for a grant and compete with any other, if you're talking about nonprofit, for instance, you've got to go out there and compete with any other nonprofit who wants to engage in that space. But as far as advocacy, I can speak for every House member, or at least every House member I think is effective. We all have an open door policy. Regardless of who you are, where you come from, or in my office, I represent Southeast Texas, 2.5 counties, but I also have 149. I lovingly call you feral cats. I have 149 feral cats, and I'm one of them. That I need to listen to their constituents' matters as well. And so we have an open policy. My staff is, a much larger staff now because I'm speaker, but they meet on a daily basis with grassroots of all across the state, different political affiliations, to hear about, what's important to them because they're the ones who are ultimately going to do the work at the end of the day when those grants are appropriated and those projects are pushed out. The state can't do it all. And so we have to rely on some of those nonprofits. And we have some really good ones, and we have ones that just need more support. And again, those grant opportunities are there. You just have to go out there and ask for them. Yes, sir.
Speaker, you mentioned people that look at our bond rating, concerned about the investment in infrastructure. So as you look at the surplus, I know that you're looking at it closely. For every dollar that's invested in infrastructure, you get $6
Sure.
Back in the economy. How do we help you prioritize that from happening? What can we do to make sure that there's money for infrastructure in place this month?
Well, what you're doing today is perfect, and you need to come to Austin and say the same things. And you need to show the rapid growth, and you need quite frankly, you need your counterparts in Dallas, even if you don't agree with them. You need your folks from Dallas doing it, and you need folks in Travis County, Central Texas saying it. You need the Bexar County community saying it. The border, I talked about the border and all the trade we have along the RGV in South Texas. Everyone needs to be advocating for it because if there is a serious push to take half this money, for instance, and put in the property tax relief, okay, now you're down to, again, $15 billion of the 30, and of that $15 billion, what is going to be appropriated for, say, increased costs of running the government. That's a coastal spine. Oh, I didn't even bring up broadband. We created Broadband Council. As of last, we put $500 million in ARPA funds to make certain that every single Texan has broadband, how important it is to this entire economy. And at that time, we thought it would be about $6 billion would be what the state should invest in broadband. That was in 2019. That was before inflation, and that was in 2021. That was before rapid inflation. So that $6 billion is no longer $6 billion. It's going to be much higher than that, if we can even get the contractors, or we can even get the product. So that's another competing interest with infrastructure, although I call that infrastructure, but not the type of infrastructure that I advocate for on a daily basis. But there's going to be so many competing communities and so many competing voices for these resources that I highly recommend getting to Austin bright and early in January, and maybe not leave until May. I've got one unique thing about this Texas speaker is an apartment actually behind the chambers where I actually sleep, I actually stay. And y'all welcome to stay there if you need overnight accommodations. But I would highly recommend not leaving Austin, because anything can happen. Of course, Chairman Bonin is from the Harris County area, Chair of Appropriations, so I'm sure he's heard an earful from many of y'all, but his ears are going to be full of a lot of people. So again, either at the table or on the menu. So I recommend being at the table. So thank y'all for having me. Appreciate it.
I think that I didn't get my fill as a speaker today. I want some more. So Greg, Darren, Jeff, Collins, Jim Russ, Jack Drake, not as tagged, but on our individual capacity, are holding a fundraiser for the speaker at 5:30 Lagrigrias. And I think all of us should be there and support the speaker, because what I heard from him is that there's Dallas, and then there's Houston, and Harris County, but he's connected to Houston-Harris County, right? Yeah, so I think that the speaker needs our support as he goes to Austin. I want to close with a couple of quick things. One, I want to thank Metro for their continued support and their leadership in this region and all the things they do. We see Kat Grayborn here as well. This region is coming together on transportation, speaker. We've built a consensus. We are cooperating with each other. And I think Dallas in the past had a reputation of having it together. Houston actually has it together. And so we're coming to you with some big asks in terms of our infrastructure and transportation need. And we also need some legislation to make it a little easier on industries like the toll authority and others, where we need to clean some language up to just make it easier for us to do business. So we're going to be coming to, I'm going to take you up on that, that speaker suite that you offered me. As a fellow Lyceum, I also want to ask Jeff Collins just to kind of raise his hand a little bit. He is leading our legislative committee. And so as those of you that have interest that are not part of the committee, please look up Jeff Collins because we are making the agenda. TAG was one of the first organizations that started to advocate for the electric car and try to figure out how do we actually pay for this, because General Motors has said by 2035 they'll stop making combustible engines. So the rate at which we're adding electric cars, if we don't do that, then we're gonna we're not gonna get anywhere. I just saw my friend Regina Rogers just join me, speaker. That's a surprise for you right there. My friend from Beaumont. Welcome, Regina. Regina and I are dear friends, and I mentioned that you would be around, and I wanted to make sure that she come by and say hello. Thank you for being here. With that, I don't have much to add other than the fact that have a wonderful afternoon. Pay attention to what's happening in the legislature. Your involvement, your engagement is really important. Greg. Oh, and then as we close, I also want to thank Esmeralda, who's been acting as our intern, who stays up till 1 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out who sits where and how do these tables get done, and does an outstanding job. So with that, thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you for our elected leadership for being here and our agency heads for being here. And thank you for the fellowship of this community. Speaker, Harris County and Houston and this region have got it together. All you need to do is pass a little extra cash for us. Thank you.